Okay, we're going to be looking at one of the most useful things that we can do in Excel in this video, which is to create what is called a pivot table. And the basic logic behind a pivot table is that we are going to group our data based on one of our columns, and then we're going to summarize those groups. And this is a really common task that you'll use in all kinds of settings. So if you're a journalist, you use this all the time, but also if you're working in an office, if you're working with financial data or any kind of spreadsheet data, this is just a really fundamental concept to grasp. So let me walk you through it and we'll understand what I mean by group and summarize. So I've got some apartment data and I'm going to go ahead and create a pivot table. So all I'm going to do is click into my data somewhere. I don't want to have anything selected like this. I just want to have clicked somewhere. Then at the top, I'm going to come to data, summarize with pivot table. This should populate to what it needs to. It's going to select your whole table and I'm going to put it into a new worksheet. So I'm going to create a new tab here. Now, so I said we're going to group and then we're going to summarize. So I've got a few things I could group my my apartment complexes by. For now, let's say I want to group by ActAlly. So ActAlly is a program. Some complexes are in it, some complexes are not. So if I take this field, this column, and I drag it to rows, I'm going to get one row for each of the different values in that column. Okay, you could use this if you had data on race, right? I want to group by race. Here I'm grouping by whether it's ActAlly or not ActAlly. So that's grouping. And now what I'm going to do is summarize that data. So there's, I don't know, 50 complexes that have true here and a lot that have false. And I might want to know, is the average rent higher for apartment complexes that are in this program or that are not in this program? So what I want to do is I want to summarize my column that has rent data. So if I come down here, I'm going to summarize the 2-bedroom rent, and what I'm going to do here is drag it to values. Okay, so you'll see here this says sum of 2-bedroom rent. So one way we could summarize all of those values, right? So here's my 2-bedroom rent column. Some of these correspond to ones that are true. And if I'm summarizing by summing, it's going to take all of those values and just add them up. And that's what I get here. But that doesn't really make sense for rent. What I want to know is what's the average rent at these complexes. So if I click here on this little I can tell it what do I want to do to all of those numbers. So let's average those numbers. So now I can see, okay, which has a higher average rent, the ones that have a true for ActAlly, okay? Other things that I might want to do really commonly, so averaging is a really common one. I can add multiple values here. So let's say I want to know about 2-bedroom rent, but also which one has a bigger square feet, right? Which one has bigger apartment units. So if I drag this here, it's going to sum it. And the main reason I don't want to sum it is because I don't know how many false and true, right? There might be way more false than true. So obviously this square feet, if I sum it, is going to be bigger. But I'm going to average it now. And we see that on average, ActAlly complexes are smaller and cost more than non-ActAlly. Okay. The other thing that is really common with pivot tables is I might just want to know how many are true and how many are false, right? So what we're asking in that situation is how many of these rows say true and how many say false, right? Really common. So all I need to do here is drag any of these values into the values. So I'll just drag ActAlly here, and it's going to go with count here. And count means count how many rows, okay? So if it didn't automatically use count here, I would select count, but now I know that there are 15 complexes that are true for ActAlly and 125 that are false or not ActAlly, okay? So that's the basic logic of a pivot table. I'm going to group by some value, and then I'm going to summarize the other columns using different functions like average, like count. You might want to use sum in some cases. Let's take a look at one more example. So this is police report data. Okay, and there's a lot more here that I might want to summarize with. So again, to create a pivot table, I'm going to click in to a value and I'm going to go data, summarize with pivot table. Now, these are police reports to apartment complexes. And I might just want to know like which complexes get the most police calls. Okay, so I'm going to group by the property. So that's going to give me one row for each of my different complexes. And then I'm going to do the same thing we did earlier where I'm going to count. So count of property, and now I know how many police reports were to these properties. If I want to sort this, I can click on the arrow here and I can tell it which column I want to sort by. So I'm going to sort by the count of property and I'm going to sort descending. So now I know, okay, this one gets the most police reports on down. I can also, though, summarize by, one second. All right, I lost my pivot table. I might not want to summarize by property, though. I might want to summarize by, let's say, by the activity, okay? So now I can figure out which activities are most common at complexes, right? So let's sort on count of activity descending. Okay, so not terribly surprising, noise violations are the most common. Another thing that you should be aware of, though, is I can sort or group by multiple items. So let's say I want to know where these noise disturbances are, right? Which activity is the most common, but also where they're occurring. So if I pull property in underneath activity, so it's first going to sort by activity, right? So here are my activities, but now I can zoom in and say, okay, where are the fights? Well, the one with the most fights is this one, and going down. So this can be a really, really useful way to explore your data, to understand what kinds of rows you have more of, and also to start to understand the relationships between those rows. So to summarize, what we're doing with a pivot table is we're grouping our data. So we need a categorical variable of some kind for that. And then we're summarizing it. And a lot of times what we're doing is counting. So I would want count here, and then it doesn't matter what I pull in. That's just going to count rows. Or I'm doing some operation to numbers. So if I pull a numeric value here, I can then average all those numbers, or I can sum them, whatever makes sense for the analysis that I want to perform.